Living on my family's farm has always been peaceful. 3 generations of my family worked this land before me, and I plan to pass it down to my kids someday. We've got 50 acres of good soil, growing everything from corn to tomatoes, with a small barn and a farmhouse that my grandfather built with his own hands. Everything was perfect until the fancy new housing development, Oak Ridge Estates, started going up next door last year. I should have known trouble was coming when they built those identical beige houses right up against my eastern fence line. The developer promised there wouldn't be any problems with my farm operations. Live and let live, he said. But last Tuesday, I found a thick envelope in my mailbox that changed everything. The letter inside was from the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, printed on expensive paper with a gold letterhead. Dear property owner, it started, your property has been found in violation of multiple community standards. The list of violations was ridiculous. My tractor was an eyesore, my storage shed needed to be upgraded to match community aesthetics, and my crops were creating unsightly views for the neighborhood. I almost laughed until I saw the fine print at the bottom. They were threatening daily fines of $200 until I brought my property into compliance. These city folks had lost their minds if they thought they could tell a farmer how to run his farm. I called my neighbor Tom, who'd been farming the land on the other side of me for 30 years. They sent me one too, Tom said, sounding worried. Been here longer than they have, but they're acting like we're the problem. We agreed to ignore the letters. After all, our farms weren't even part of their development, but the HOA wasn't done with us yet. A few days later, I noticed something odd while checking my irrigation system. Some of my boundary markers were moved, and there were little pink flags stuck in the ground near my cornfield. I hadn't put them there, and neither had Tom. When I pulled one up, it had property line assessment printed on it with the HOA logo. That same afternoon, I caught 2 people in fancy clothes walking along my fence line with clipboards. They scattered like scared rabbits when I drove my tractor over to ask what they were doing. Something wasn't right, and I needed proof of what was happening on my land. The next day, I drove into town and bought 6 high-quality security cameras. They weren't cheap, but my dad always said good evidence is worth its weight in gold. I spent the whole weekend setting them up. 2 covering the fence line where my property met Oak Ridge Estates, 2 watching the barn and equipment area, and 2 monitoring the main access points to my fields. The cameras were up for less than 24 hours when they caught their first visitor. The HOA president herself, a woman named Karen Winston, was taking pictures of my barn from my private access road. I confronted her right there, phone in hand, recording everything. This is private property, I told her calmly. You're trespassing. Karen gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Actually, according to our community maps, this access road falls within HOA jurisdiction. We're simply documenting violations of our community standards. I knew she was lying. I've got property maps going back 50 years, showing exactly where my land starts and ends. But Karen walked away like she owned the place, her heels clicking on the gravel road my grandfather laid down decades ago. That night, I dug out all my property documents and found something interesting. The developer had tried to include a small strip of my land in their HOA jurisdiction by using outdated property maps. They were hoping I wouldn't notice and would just start following their rules. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. Tools went missing from my barn. A section of my irrigation pipes was damaged. One morning I found my no trespassing signs torn down. The security cameras were catching everything, but the HOA members were getting bolder, not smarter. When I got my second warning letter, this one threatening legal action, I knew this wasn't going to end quietly. They weren't just trying to enforce their rules. They wanted my land, and they thought they could bully a simple farmer into giving up. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. My family didn't keep this farm running for 3 generations by backing down from bullies. I had the property deeds, I had the security cameras, and most importantly, I had the truth on my side. If Karen and her HOA wanted to fight, they were about to learn why you don't mess with a farmer's land. That night, As I was reviewing the security footage, my cameras caught something that made my blood run cold. There were people with flashlights moving through my cornfield after midnight. What they did next would change everything. The security camera footage from that night still gives me chills. 3 figures moving through my cornfield at 12:30 a.m., their flashlight beams bouncing between the stalks. I watched live on my phone as they made their way deeper into my property. They were wearing dark clothes and carrying some kind of equipment. Definitely not random teenagers looking for trouble. I called the police first, then grabbed my own flashlight and headed out. By the time the police arrived, the trespassers were gone, but they left plenty of evidence behind. More of those pink HOA flags, but this time they were placed in a straight line cutting right through my best cornfield. They'd actually trampled down a path through my crops to place their flags. Officer Martinez walked the property with me, shining his light on the damaged corn. "This is criminal trespassing and vandalism," he said, "taking photos, plus destruction of crops. You said you have camera footage." I showed him the recordings right there on my phone. His expression turned serious when he recognized Karen Winston, our HOA president, among the nighttime visitors. The next morning, I got an email from Karen that made my jaw drop. "Dear resident, during our routine property inspection, we noticed unauthorized agricultural activity encroaching on HOA common areas. Please remove all crops from the designated zone within 72 hours. Attached was a crude map showing nearly a quarter of my farmland marked as HOA property. I printed every property document I had and took them straight to Tom, my farming neighbor. His hand shook as he looked at Karen's map. "They did the same thing to me last night," he said quietly. "Different section, same story. Trying to claim my backfield as their property." He showed me his own security footage. Same group, same flags, same night. Word spread fast through our farming community. 5 other farmers had received similar notices. Each time, the HOA members had trespassed at night to place their flags before sending their demands. They were trying to steal our land piece by piece, hoping we'd be too intimidated to fight back. But they made a big mistake coming onto my property that night. My cameras didn't just catch them placing flags. They recorded Karen giving clear instructions to change the property markers. "Move them 10 feet in each time," her voice said clearly on the footage. "If they don't fight it, we'll do it again next month." That was all the evidence we needed. I posted a clip of the video online, just the part showing them damaging my crops. It went viral in our community Facebook groups. Suddenly, even people living in Oak Ridge estates were messaging me with their own HOA horror stories. Karen had been using these tactics for years, just never this brazenly. The threats started coming the next day. First, a letter from the HOA's lawyer about defamation. Then anonymous notes left on my truck about how accidents happen on farms all the time. Someone even spray-painted "sell or else" on my barn door. But my cameras caught that too. 2 HOA board members in the middle of the night, not even wearing masks. Not exactly criminal masterminds. Karen tried damage control, calling an emergency HOA meeting. I wasn't invited, being a non-member. But my friend Susan lives in Oak Ridge and recorded the whole thing. Karen stood there lying through her teeth, claiming my cameras were fake and the video was edited. She said farmers like me were threatening their property values and needed to be brought into compliance or removed. That's when a young homeowner stood up and played his own cell phone video. He'd recorded Karen and her cronies planning the whole thing during a private board meeting. Their real goal? They wanted our farmland for a planned expansion. New houses, new shops, new revenue opportunities for the HOA. They thought they could intimidate us into selling cheap. The meeting ended in chaos. Half the homeowners walked out in disgust. The other half started arguing about property values and development rights. Through it all, Karen just sat there with that same fake smile, probably thinking she could still salvage her plan. But she didn't know about my last security camera, the hidden one near my property line. The one that caught her having a very interesting conversation with the developer at 2 a.m. just last night. A conversation about forged documents, illegal rezoning, and making troublesome farmers disappear. I waited until everyone left the meeting before forwarding that footage to Officer Martinez. Sometimes the best way to catch a snake is to let it think it's winning, right up until it strikes. And Karen was about to strike again. I just had to wait and let my cameras record every second of it. Looking at the monitors that night, I saw more flashlights heading toward my farm. But this time, I was ready for them. What happened next would make their midnight flag planting look like a friendly visit. The security cameras caught everything that night. Karen and her HOA gang weren't just planting flags anymore. They came prepared with surveying equipment and official-looking documents. My hidden cameras recorded them methodically moving my property markers, taking photos of the wrong locations, and even hammering in new boundary posts. What they didn't know was that Officer Martinez and 2 other police officers were watching the whole thing from my barn. We'd set up a sting operation after I shared the previous night's footage. As soon as the HOA crew started tampering with my property markers, a serious crime in our state, the officers moved in. The look on Karen's face when those police spotlights hit her was priceless. "This is a simple property inspection," she tried claiming, waving a stack of papers. But Officer Martinez wasn't buying it. At 1 a.m., with surveying equipment, while moving legal property markers, they confiscated everything, including Karen's phone and those documents she was so proud of. The papers turned out to be fake property maps, created to make it look like my farm was partly on HOA land. But whoever made them messed up big time. They'd used the wrong county seal, making it a clear case of document forgery. When the police ran the serial numbers on the surveying equipment, things got even worse for Karen. It had been reported stolen from the county surveyor's office 2 weeks ago. News about the arrest spread like wildfire. Local reporters showed up at my farm the next morning, wanting to see the security footage. I showed them everything: the nighttime trespassing, the crop damage, the marker tampering, even the spray painting incident. By evening, it was a top story on 3 local channels. That's when my phone started blowing up with messages from other farmers. Not just in our area, but from all over the county. Turns out Karen's HOA wasn't just targeting us. They'd been pulling the same scam in other neighborhoods where farms bordered new developments. Always the same pattern. Fake documents, moved markers, threatening letters, then pressure to sell cheap. A reporter dug deeper into Oak Ridge Estate's finances and found something huge. The HOA had taken out massive loans to buy up land for expansion, promising the bank they already had farmers ready to sell. Karen had even forged some of our signatures on intent-to-sell documents. When those loans came due next month, the whole HOA would go bankrupt unless they got our land. More security footage kept revealing new crimes. One camera caught board members destroying my irrigation system. Another recorded them releasing rats near my grain storage. The worst was catching them pouring something into my water supply. Testing showed it was weed killer. They weren't just trying to steal my land anymore. They were actively trying to destroy my farm. The district attorney's office got involved after seeing all the evidence. They set up a special task force to investigate HOA fraud across the county. Karen and her board weren't just facing trespassing charges anymore. This was serious criminal conspiracy territory. I organized a meeting with all the targeted farmers at my barn. 20 families showed up, each with their own horror stories and evidence. Tom had security footage of HOA members threatening his kids. Sarah caught them cutting her fence so her horses would escape. Mike had recordings of them trying to bribe his workers to sabotage his equipment. We put together a massive evidence file. Hundreds of hours of security footage, fake documents, threatening letters, photos of damage, and police reports. The DA called it one of the most organized cases of property fraud she'd ever seen. But we weren't done yet. My cameras were still recording, and Karen was getting desperate. Late that night, my phone buzzed with an alert from the security system. Someone was messing with my cameras, trying to disable them. But they didn't find the backup cameras I'd hidden after the first incident. These new cameras caught something so shocking that even Officer Martinez couldn't believe it at first. There was Karen again, but this time she wasn't alone. With her was the bank president who'd approved those HOA loans, the county zoning official who'd been blocking our complaints, and someone none of us expected to see, a state representative who'd been pushing for laws to weaken farm protection rights. Their midnight conversation laid out the whole conspiracy, and my cameras caught every word of it. Finally, we had proof of how high this really went. As I watched the footage with Tom the next morning, he just shook his head and said, "You don't need a tractor to dig up dirt this deep." I sent copies of the new footage to Officer Martinez and my lawyer. Within hours, the FBI got involved. This wasn't just local crime anymore. Karen and her friends had no idea what was about to hit them, but they were about to learn a hard lesson about messing with farmers. The emergency HOA meeting was set for 7 p.m. at the Oak Ridge Community Center. Karen thought she was calling the meeting to vote on permanent solutions to the farm problem. She had no idea what was really coming. I arrived early with Tom and a dozen other farmers. Each of us carried thick folders of evidence, and my laptop was loaded with hours of security footage. Local news vans were already parked outside. Seemed someone had tipped them off about tonight. Karen's face turned white when she saw the cameras, but she tried to keep her cool as people filed in. The room was packed like never before. Every homeowner from Oak Ridge Estates, all the neighboring farmers, 3 police officers, 2 FBI agents in suits, and enough reporters to fill a press conference. Karen's hands shook as she tried to bring the meeting to order. "Before we begin tonight's agenda," she started, but I stood up and cut her off. "Actually, Karen, we've got a different agenda tonight." I nodded to Officer Martinez, who locked the doors. "We're going to watch some movies, starring you and your friends." I connected my laptop to the projector as Karen tried to object. The first video played, crystal clear footage of her leading the nighttime raids on my farm. Then came the scenes of property marker tampering, followed by clips of her board members vandalizing farm equipment. With each new video, the room got quieter. "These are clearly edited," Karen tried claiming, but her voice was shaking. That's when I played the audio from my hidden cameras, her own voice discussing fake documents and forged signatures. The FBI agents were taking notes, and homeowners were filming everything on their phones. Next came the financial records, proof of embezzled HOA funds, secret bank accounts, and those fraudulent loans. The bank president who'd helped her was already in custody, singing like a bird to save himself. Karen started edging toward the door, but Officer Martinez stepped in her way. "But wait," I said, "here's the best part." The final video played, Karen's midnight meeting with the corrupt officials. The whole room gasped when the state representative appeared on screen, openly discussing bribes and illegal zoning changes. "This is all a misunderstanding," Karen stammered, but her own board members were already backing away from her. The HOA vice president stood up and publicly resigned. Then the treasurer did the same, like rats leaving a sinking ship. That's when Susan, a homeowner I'd never met, grabbed the microphone. "I move for an immediate vote to remove the entire board," she announced. The motion passed almost unanimously. Karen watched helplessly as her power crumbled in minutes. The FBI agent stepped forward next, reading rights and listing charges. Mail fraud, conspiracy, criminal property damage, forgery. The list went on and on. Karen's perfect mask finally cracked as they led her away in handcuffs. But the real shock came when more homeowners started speaking up. Turns out Karen had been stealing from them for years. Inflated maintenance fees, fake violation fines, rigged contract bids. She'd built herself a little empire of corruption, and it was all falling apart in one night. The new evidence kept coming. Homeowners brought forward their own recordings and documents. The FBI had to set up a special hotline just to handle all the complaints. By the end of the meeting, half the HOA board was in custody, and the other half were volunteering to testify. As the crowd finally started leaving, an elderly homeowner stopped to shake my hand. "We had no idea," she said tearfully. "We thought the HOA was protecting our neighborhood, not destroying it." I looked around the room, at the shocked faces, the relief, the anger at being deceived for so long. "Sometimes," I told her, "the best neighbors are the ones who've been here all along. You just have to give them a chance." Outside, news crews were already reporting live about the HOA conspiracy, as they called it. But they didn't have the whole story yet. My security cameras had caught one final meeting the night before, something so big it would shake up the whole state's political system. As I drove home that night, I saw Karen's house was already dark. A "for sale" sign stood in her yard, and moving trucks would probably arrive tomorrow. Justice was finally coming, but this wasn't over yet. The last piece of evidence was the biggest of all, and tomorrow everyone would see it. The morning after the HOA meeting, my security footage went viral. Not just locally, it hit national news. Every major network was running stories about the great HOA conspiracy and how farm cameras caught corruption. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with interview requests. But the biggest bombshell was still coming. Remember that last piece of evidence? The security cameras had caught Karen in one final desperate meeting. She was with the state representative and two big-time real estate developers. They weren't just planning to take our farms. They were plotting to change state laws to strip all farming communities of their property rights. The FBI investigation revealed a massive scheme. Corrupt officials had been targeting family farms all across the state, using HOAs as weapons. The goal? Force farmers to sell cheap, then flip the land for massive profits. Karen wasn't just a corrupt HOA president. She was part of a criminal enterprise that had stolen millions from farming communities. The arrest started at dawn. FBI agents picked up the state representative at his breakfast meeting. Two developers were caught trying to flee the state. The county zoning official turned himself in, agreeing to testify against everyone else. By lunchtime, 23 people were in custody. Back at Oak Ridge Estates, everything changed overnight. The new HOA board, led by Susan and other honest homeowners, immediately canceled all the fake rules and fines. They sent every resident a formal apology and started working on making things right with the farming community. Tom and I helped organize a community event, Farm Day, to bring everyone together. Families from Oak Ridge brought their kids to learn about farming. We gave tractor rides, taught them about crops, and shared stories about our family histories on this land. The same people who'd complained about unsightly farm equipment were now asking how they could support local agriculture. The legal aftermath was massive. Karen and her conspirators faced federal charges. Most took plea deals to avoid long sentences. The state legislature passed new laws protecting farmers from HOA harassment, naming it the Security Camera Act after how the whole scheme was exposed. All the stolen money was traced and returned. Farms that had been forced out over the years got compensation. The bank that helped Karen had to pay massive fines. Even the development company behind Oak Ridge Estates had to create a fund to support local farming communities. My farm? It's doing better than ever. The property lines are permanently marked now, protected by state law. Those security cameras that caught everything, they're still up, but these days they mostly catch kids waving as they walk past with their parents, learning about where their food comes from. Last week, I found something interesting in my mailbox, an invitation to join the new HOA board as an advisory member. They want a farmer's perspective to help build better relationships between developments and agricultural communities. I accepted. Karen's house sold quickly to a young couple who love the idea of living next to a working farm. They bring their little girl to watch the tractors work and ask questions about growing vegetables. Yesterday, they asked if they could start a small garden in their backyard. I'm helping them set it up this weekend. The other farms around here are thriving too. Tom's kids decided to stay and keep farming instead of moving to the city. Sarah's horses have new admirers who help with stable work. Mike's produce stand has more customers than ever. mostly Oak Ridge residents who now understand the value of local farming. As for those security cameras that started it all, they caught one last interesting scene. The new HOA board put up a sign at the entrance to Oak Ridge Estates. It reads, "Proud to be a farm-friendly community where city and country work together. Sometimes at sunset, I sit on my porch and look out over my fields. The corn's growing tall, the tomatoes are ripening, and there's peace between neighbors. It took some hidden cameras and a whole lot of drama, but we finally found the right way to live together." The other day, a reporter asked if I was worried about other HOAs trying similar schemes. I just smiled and pointed to my security cameras. "Let them try," I said. "These days, the whole world is watching, and that's exactly how it should be. After all, good fences make good neighbors, but good security cameras make honest ones." Would you like me to adjust anything about this final section? I can modify the tone, pacing, or add more specific details if needed.